Zilch left, 35 Wichita Macho
Dice
Toe.
right, F5.
Dice right numbers, 3 Jet Spielberg.
Ready? Right. All right, and welcome back to episode 4 of the Pre-Snap Pressure podcast. I'm Nick Collazo, of course, joined by always by Ryan Shapiro. How you doing today, Ryan?
Pretty good. Been pretty non what's the word I'm looking for?
Eventful?
Yeah, non-eventful, minus the Rangers getting swept by the Phillies. We're
My
just
baseball team just won a series, but they're also in 4th place in
oh
the
my
division.
God, good
So
for the
it's not like it
Braves.
matters that much, exactly.
Ruining
Anyways,
your
not the
draft
topic.
position.
Is it gonna matter that much? Not really. Not the topic of today's video. The topic of today's video, the Atlantic Coastal Conference, even if you can still call it that.
The Coastal Conference.
Just the all coastal conference.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you can call it that either, because Texas isn't on a coast last time I checked. But anyways, ACC topic of today's video, the last conference we have to go in terms of preseason rankings. Before next week, we're covering week 0, and then it's college football season. So, super excited. Let's move right along. First team to talk about, the Boston College Eagles. Not very high on them. Well, either of us are. They're at 15 for you, 14 for me. Didn't have a terrible year last year. Went 7-6, middle of the pack in the ACC, 4-4 in conference play. Yeah, they showed some promise, especially early on in the year. With Thomas Castellanos at quarterback, and then they had the whole drama there, and then he ended up getting benched, didn't finish out the year. He's now left and is at Florida State now. So, but outside of that, a lot of the guys they're bringing in are returning, including their quarterback who took over the end of last year, Grayson James, who's back for his 5th year. So, it's not a terrible team. There's not really a lot to be excited about. There's not much that stands out to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think Grayson James could have a pretty solid year for himself. When he did step in, he was pretty good for Boston College. You know, had 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 1,200 yards. Played pretty well for the Eagles, I think. But yeah, I mean, and then you know you lose Castellanos. You know, could transfer went to Florida State, and you bring in the worst recruiting class in the conference overall. Uh, it's probably just going to be a at best 5-7 year for Boston College.
All right, moving on. Second team is the Berkeley Golden Bears. We both have them at 13th. Out of everybody in this conference, I'd say top to bottom, they probably lost the most in the transfer portal, and that's mainly because of 2 really big players they lost. They lost running back Jaden Ott, who's at Oklahoma now, and quarterback Fernando Mendoza's at Indiana now. But they also brought in a really good amount. They brought in Devin Brown from Ohio State, and if we know anything about Ohio State quarterbacks, it's once you get them from Ohio State, they tend to have pretty good seasons. We saw that last year with Kyle McCord at Syracuse, who led the country in passing yards. But there's just some other guys I really like that they brought in this past transfer cycle. But overall, I just think it's too much and not too good quality of transfers. Even though they did get some good ones, a majority of them are just roster fillers and not really plug and play instant impact guys like you see from some of the other top schools that we have in this conference. So I feel like 13 is a good ranking for them.
Yeah, I think you're right there. They didn't necessarily, bring in the best guys out there. They brought in a lot of filler guys, a lot of older guys. I think a few guys they think will stay for a couple of years and make an impact later in their careers. But I think this is another one of those teams where they've just a huge roster turnover, a lot of guys coming in from other places. There's just not a lot that we've seen from them as a team that we can say, uh, for sure they're going to be a top sixth team in the ACC.
Now, granted, it's not a bad team. We saw them in that game last year against Miami where they took them down to the wire, had some very questionable things towards the end of that game that ended them losing that game. And they played some close games here and there. It was just one of the more inconsistent teams last year. They finished around the same range. They finished what I think 14th last year. Yeah. So yeah, I just don't expect them to kind of get any more consistent with that big of a roster turnover.
Yeah, and it's not like their schedule's any easier this year. They've got North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and SMU all in conference. Minnesota's not bad. So just a lot of teams, or a few games that I just don't think they'll win to begin with, and a couple of games that I doubt they'll win. Um, I don't think they can beat Duke. I don't think they can beat Virginia. I don't think they'll beat Louisville. It's a lot of, non-winnable games that they have this year.
Well, moving on, we spinning around from kind of the bottom of the pack to all the way up to number one for both of us. Next up, the Clemson Tigers, playoff team last year after winning the ACC, dramatic fashion in the ACC championship game over SMU. First round knockouts, unfortunately, to the Texas Longhorns. What ended up being a pretty good game in the end. But Clemson is getting a lot of national traction before the season start. People are saying this is probably one of the more complete rosters in the country. This is a team we should look for, towards the end of the year to kind of make a push for a national title. And I mean, you can see why outside of Ohio State, I think Clemson has the best receiving core in the country. Just period. TJ Moore, Brian Wesco, and Antonio Williams, three tremendous receivers. Cade Klubnik, preseason Heisman favorite. No questions there. Well, there could be some questions there because there's still some big game questions for him. And then the defense was really good last year, and they kept a lot of the same guys this year. And it's hard to believe, but looking at this right here, Clemson brought in 3 transfers from the transfer portal. So maybe a step in the right direction for Dabo with how to work on the offseason of this new era. But no, jokes aside, I feel like Clemson's going to be a really good team this year. Of course, have them number one in the ACC rankings. But I said it 3 weeks ago. I'm going to say it again. I think they're losing week 1.
I don't know. I think that's gonna be one of the best games of the year. I think you have two of the best starting quarterbacks in the country. You have two of the best receiving cores in the country. You've got a pair of solid running backs. It's gonna be an exciting game for sure. I think Cade Klubnik, in my opinion, is without a doubt the best quarterback in the country right now. Just number one based off of seniority, and number two based off of what he's done. He's had multiple 3,000-yard seasons, I believe. No, he's had one 3,000-yard
Just one.
season and a 2,800-yard season, but he had 36 touchdowns and 6 interceptions last year. He's one of the better running quarterbacks in the country. And the defense, anytime you can return a bunch of guys on the defensive side just to reinforce that with this offense, it looks like it could be a really good year for Clemson. And they've also, minus the LSU game, I don't know there's a game that they could necessarily lose. They were going into that SMU game as the underdogs. So, you know,
I'd say for Clemson, the hardest part of their schedule is the first 5 games. LSU, get a break with Troy. At Georgia Tech, I think that's going to be a really good game. Versus Syracuse. Syracuse has kind of been somewhat of a, I guess, kryptonite to Clemson the last few years. It seems like they always play Syracuse really closely for some reason. And then at North Carolina, which I think should also be a good game, but I do think Clemson wins that one pretty handily. Um, then they get, a fairly easy part. They do have SMU in the middle of that schedule, but Boston College, Duke, Florida State, eh, I think those are pretty easy wins. But then South Carolina to end the year on the road. So it's not an easy schedule in the slightest. They have some really hard games in here. But if this team is what everybody's saying this team should be, then I don't think they should have more than 2 losses.
Yeah, no, there's no way. I mean, I- there's like not really any games that I see them like out of the blue, just like, yeah, that's going to be a loss. Like, I,
No, absolutely not.
yeah, I don't think there's even that South Carolina game. I think the trend, what it's been, has been
The
you
away team wins.
they go on the road and they win.
All right, moving on. We go to the Duke Blue Devils. Both have them middle of the pack. You have them at 7. I have them at 9. Duke's not a team that brought in a lot of transfers through the portal, but the ones they did bring in, I feel like are going to be impactful for them. Darian Mensah from Tulane, I think one of the better quarterbacks that was available in the portal. Especially on offense, a lot of the guys they brought in 2 receivers who look to start. So it's unlike a lot of teams where we see they bring in, a lot of portal guys, but then a lot of it's just for depth purposes. They're trying to fill out their depth chart, make sure they have guys at multiple levels. But Duke went out and got guys that they actually needed to make an impact, and then is going to stick to developing their younger guys to then elevate the next year. So, I feel like a good season's on the way for Duke. But their road schedule is kind of what concerns me. At Syracuse, I don't think that's going to be an easy game. They go to Cal, which, as we said, Cal's not going to be the best team, but it's a team in North Carolina traveling all the way to California for a game. Georgia Tech at Clemson, at North Carolina. I'm not saying Duke will be bad, but I'm just not going to be surprised if they have 3 or 4 losses at the end of the year.
Yeah, yeah, another one of those teams that could be pretty good, but there's probably not going to be a lot there. It'll be a little interesting to see Mensah's return to Tulane. I feel like that'll be a fun game for him going back to New Orleans for that one. But yeah, this road schedule is pretty brutal. You've got Syracuse, Cal, Clemson, North Carolina. The only I think tough road environment that you're avoiding is Virginia Tech in that one. So it's it's a lot of games that I don't think they'll win. I don't think they'll beat Clemson. I don't think they'll beat North Carolina. Syracuse and Cal maybe, but I just don't think they will.
All right, moving on. We have the Florida State Seminoles. I don't know if you can really find a word to describe how last season was for them. You could say disappointing, but that would be severely understating. What happened last year in Tallahassee? 2-10. Coming into this year, a whole lot of new playmakers at receiver, whole lot of new guys in the offensive line, new quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, we said was brought in from Boston College, and a bunch of new guys on defense. I mean, you just don't really know with that much new turnover. You don't really know how good that this team could be because we've seen it in the past 2 years, right? In 2023, they brought in a lot of guys from the transfer portal and they went undefeated and just missed out on the playoff shot. And that was, controversial that they missed out on that playoff shot anyways. Then in the offseason, they brought in a bunch of more guys for the portal and then went 2-10. So you don't really know what we're getting here. But I do want to mention that I feel like Thomas Castellanos knows what this Florida team's going to be like because he said this. This is in reference to their game they play against Alabama in Tallahassee, week 1. Castellanos said, "They don't have Nick Saban to save them. I just don't see them stopping me." And then when asked about saying that, he says, "We stand on what I said." Notice the word "we" there.
Who is we?
But there's no disrespect between that team or anything like that. It's just the confidence that I have in my teammates and the way we've been preparing and putting this preparation together this offseason. I just feel confident in the guys and the work that we've been putting in.
I feel like that's just the type of player that he is.
Yeah, that might be true, but I don't know why you would say something like
I
that.
mean, you remember
And why would you say they're not stopping me?
you remember in the Mizzou game last year, like at the start of that game, he was talking all that smack to the student section and whatnot. And
It
they were up
was.
early. They were up early. But I mean, yeah, that's just the type of player he is. I don't
No, that is the type of guy he is. He's a very
cocky.
cocky, confident guy. but that's I don't know, I feel like that's something coaches tell you not to do is to go out handing out bulletin board material, and I feel like that's exactly what he did by saying that.
No, that's fine. I don't
Anyways,
mind seeing Florida State go 3-9 again. That wouldn't
I
bother
don't
me in the
either. I
slightest
mean,
bit.
we don't think that's gonna happen though. You have them at 6. I have them at 8. I feel like if they don't have some sort of success this year, Mike Norvell's gone.
100%.
Um, but yeah, we have the week 1 against Alabama. You do get them at home, but it's still Alabama. They go to Virginia. They play at home versus Miami, who I think is gonna be really good. At Stanford, at Clemson, and at Florida to end the year. Good 3 or 4 hard games in there. I don't think this team's gonna be nowhere near as bad as they were last year.
They shouldn't be.
Um, they shouldn't
They
be.
really shouldn't be.
Anytime you go from having DJ Uyunglele as your quarterback to having anybody else, you should see improvement. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, they also brought in, a top 10 transfer class. So hopefully that should, bolster their record a good amount. Obviously it's tough to see exactly how these guys are going to play, especially when you're bringing in an all new receiving core, almost an entirely new offensive line, a new quarterback, um, a new linebacker core, you know, a bunch of like new complete groups. You don't know exactly how they're going to play together, and you don't know exactly, how their styles of play are going to fit with each other. But, you know, there's also a baseline of skill there. I think they should be a solid team this year. And, they still brought in another one of the top recruiting classes in the conference. So that should be another sign of future success.
all right. Moving on to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, who shocked a good amount of people last year. Took down undefeated Miami at home towards the end of the season, and then went into 8 overtimes against Georgia. Note the number 8 because that's the amount of years that game took off my life. Um, anyways, they lost a couple of really solid pieces in the transfer portal. Eric Singleton being one of them, but looking at this now, for whatever they lost, they seem to just gain right back. They replaced Singleton with Eric Rivers, who, by the way, was second in the country, or is second in receivers. How am I trying to say this? In returning receivers, he had the second most yards. Good lord.
There you go.
The only one above him was Jeremiah Smith, by the way. So they lost a good receiver and replaced him with another really good receiver, and Malik Rutherford's still there, who's also a really good receiver. Jamal Haynes and Haynes King both back for another year. King being the quarterback, just makes this offense mesh so much better. I mean, last year we saw King dealt with a shoulder injury. They brought in Aaron Philo for a little bit, and it worked, but just not as well. Um, and then Jamal Haynes, I think, is a top 3 back in this conference. He's just really has really good vision and balance when running the football. This defense is the main thing that I'm questioning because they were all right last year. They brought in 4 new transfers to start. So I'm questioning to see whether that's going to be good enough because I feel like this offense on its own is good enough to compete for an ACC title, which is why I have them at 3. If the defense is slightly above average, I think they can get there.
Yeah. This team, I think, you've got one of the best returning quarterbacks in the country, has a really good, skill in not turning the ball over. He only had 2 interceptions last year. Understand he had the injury, but still, that's, one of the more impressive stat lines that I've seen from most quarterbacks. A lot of them have had trouble keeping the ball with the offense. Um, and then you look at the schedule. It's a tough one. It's not going to be fun. They get some of their tougher opponents at home. They get Clemson at home. They get Virginia Tech at home. Um, they get Syracuse at home. Some of the tougher environments that they don't have to go play at. Then they have Boston College on the road, NC State on the road, Wake Forest on the road. Again, not the toughest. atmospheres in the conference. Obviously, I think their toughest game this year is going to be Georgia, just because that's a big rivalry game. I think, to be honest, I think they can take them this year if they were able to get 8 overtimes off them
Absolutely.
last year. They're gonna be coming out, with a little chip on the shoulder, especially with a lot of returning guys who were in that game. So I don't know if Georgia wins that one necessarily.
S-
Um,
Speaking of that game,
yeah.
here's what I hope. Going into that game, um, let's say Georgia Tech's lost one, maybe two games to Clemson, and then one they probably shouldn't have.
Hmm.
And Georgia's got a loss to, Texas or Florida, or maybe two losses to a team like that. Alabama's another game they have. Going into that game, that turns that game on rivalry weekend on Friday night in Mercedes-Benz Stadium with pushing 80,000 people into a game where if you win, you're in the playoffs. That is something I really, really hope happens as we get that just peak, stake full, do or die game for both of those teams.
How much security do you think is going to be at that game?
However much it is not enough.
Entire city of Atlanta, and then some.
Yeah.
No,
All right.
I think that would be a lot of fun for that game to be there.
And that's never happened before. In that rivalry game, it's always been, one team has got aspirations of postseason and a national title on their mind, and then the other team's just trying to play spoiler. That will be
Yeah.
the first time that game is you win, you're in for both teams, which is where I desperately want to see that. Moving on, the Louisville Cardinals, pretty decent year last year, 9-4. We're fifth in the conference. We both have them being pretty good this year. You have them at fourth. I have them at fifth. They do bring in a new quarterback, but it's Miller Moss from USC through the portal, who I think is going to be a really solid addition for them. And especially looking at their schedule, I see a few hard games, but not a crazy amount. I just think it's going to be a really another successful year for Louisville.
Yeah. They've got a fair amount. They've got their fair amount of transfers coming into their lineup, but they've also got a lot of returning guys, that were in the program last year. One guy I want to mention is Isaac Brown, who's coming back for his second year, averaged about seven
That's the
yards
guy
a
I was going to bring
carry
up too.
with 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. That's
Yeah,
phenomenal as a
that
freshman.
guy's nut. That guy's nuts.
Yeah, and then you bring in Miller Moss, who's you know got experience under himself. He's a somewhat proven QB. Um, had a 2-to-1 touchdown ratio or touchdown to interception ratio last year, and you've got Chris Bell, who's back for another year, had 730 yards last year. Um, so, Colin Lacey as well, only had 200 yards last year, didn't have that many catches though. And when he did catch it, he had about 11 yards a grab. So this could be a fun Louisville team, and they've got one of the, middle of the pack schedules, I feel like. Their schedule is not that difficult. They've probably got, let's see, two, three hard games that I really see, maybe a fourth, because that Virginia Tech game is on the road. I think Miami's tough on the road. I think Clemson anywhere is going to be tough, and I think SMU on the road is going to be tough. But that Virginia Tech game is like just because of the atmosphere, I feel like is going to be tough for them. I think they can win that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lose that. So I think they'll be able to pull off a couple of upsets, maybe. I think against Miami and SMU, I think they can easily pull off an upset there. I think that Clemson game is just going to be a loss.
Well, you say that, but if we go back to last year, they had 4 losses in total. All of them were by one score. They were never truly outclassed in a matchup. They lost by 7 to Notre Dame, 7 to SMU, 7 to Miami, and 3 to Stanford. Beat Clemson by 12, by the way. So on the road, I don't know. I just feel like with the way that some of these teams, it's a trend with a lot of these teams that play close games. It can usually go either way. because they have a lot of close wins too. They beat
Yeah,
Boston
I
College
was
by
gonna say
4,
they had their fair
Virginia
amount
by
of close
4,
wins.
um, Washington by 1 in that bowl game. But like I said, they were never truly outmatched in a game fully. You know, they were if they lost, they usually hung around for most of the game. So I feel like if they could just get that slightly little bit better this year, this is a team I could easily see having only 2 losses at the end of the regular season and knocking on the door of an ACC championship spot. So
Yeah,
it really just for me depends on how well Miller Moss clicks with this
I
offense.
think you're right.
If they if they click pretty well, this is going to be a really good team.
Yeah.
That's why I have them rated so high. All right, moving on. The Miami Hurricanes coming off a 3-loss season, 2 of them, which knocked them just out of an ACC championship spot and just out of the playoffs, which they missed by 2 spots. 2 games really they shouldn't have lost. One to Georgia Tech and one to Syracuse in the last week of the season. With the amount of firepower the offense had, you had an NFL tight end, an NFL receiver. You had the number 1 overall pick. Um, just the defenses just fell flat in a couple of those games, especially in that Syracuse game. That was disappointing to watch. Um, they brought in a lot of guys through the portal this year, hoping to reload, especially on defense. Now, I guess they understood that they fell flat. They brought in 5 new transfers that are projected to be starters on defense. And then to replace Cam Ward, they went out and got Carson Beck, who I have mixed feelings about.
Uh, yeah. I don't know how I feel about that one either. Um, just I don't know if Carson Beck's like a great quarterback because I mean we saw it last year. He is a huge turnover issue.
It's the turnover issue. The lows are very low for Carson Beck, but then he's got really good arm talent. There's throws that he makes that not every college quarterback can make. I just when he's on, and when he's off, he's really off.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Mario Cristobal can unlock the best version of Carson Beck, kind of like he did with Cam Ward.
Hmm.
Because Cam Ward before coming to Miami was a 3rd or 4th round pick, and then boom, came to Miami for a year, number 1 overall pick. Um,
I'm
but
looking at
yeah,
the secondary because it's a completely new secondary this year, and it's a couple of guys. Zechariah Poyser, a sophomore, had a pretty solid year last year at Jacksonville State. 3 interceptions, 47 tackles, 8 PBUs. Jacoby Thomas, coming from Tennessee, had 2 PBUs and 14 tackles in his play time. Keontae Scott, a senior, coming from Auburn, had 16 tackles. So a couple of guys, Xavier Lucas as well, a sophomore, had an interception, uh, 2 PBUs. So a couple of guys that, you know, can play some pretty good defense, can, create tough throws. So I think the Hurricanes went out and did their job on the defensive side, but on special teams, yeah, there's a little
I
someone
already know
named
what's
Bert
coming.
Auburn, um, who I think is going to keep them out of any national title contention this year because I don't know. I think he's just got the yips. I don't know what happened to him because at Texas he was drilling kicks his first couple of years, and then all of a sudden last year he couldn't make a field goal to save his life. Even when it came down to winning a game or losing a game, he could not make a field goal. So it's y- you know if they get into those late game situations, I don't know. I don't think Bert Auburn will be able to propel them to a win in those situations. And it's going to come down to either the defense or the offense, or I think it's going to come down to the offense actually. Finishing off a drive late in the game, and then the defense, stopping it. Anything else, but I don't know if Bert Auburn is the solution at kicker.
Well, now that we've exhausted our frustrations about Miami getting players from our own teams that we're fans of, let's go ahead and move on here to North Carolina, who
I
a lot of a lot of question marks.
think
Pretty
I
much
think
complete
the
roster.
biggest question mark is Bill Belichick's girlfriend.
Yeah, that's probably one of the bigger ones for this team, which isn't good, by the way. But 71 new players they brought in, 29 just plain old recruits, but 41 transfers brought in by Bill Belichick for his first year. A lot of players left as well, so kind of makes sense for him to go out and get as much depth as he could. Again, with these teams, it's the same story with all these teams that just reload year after year after year through the transfer portal. You don't know what you're getting. You can't really see, you can't really make a good prediction based off what we just see here. Because for teams that don't usually build through the portal, like Clemson, it's year after year starters. You see development from the receivers to the defensive line because they're guys that Dabo brought in from high school and has worked them up every step of the way. And we've seen their progress on the field because they work in here and there. These guys, they're coming from all over, you know, like right here. I just see four guys from randomly from Washington that just came here, you know, from every which school. There's another three guys from Florida. There's a guy from Carolina, East Carolina, UConn, Bama. There's just so many new players that have just brought in and have just made it a completely new roster that we just don't know what exactly we're looking at until they start playing football. So I can't really rank them higher than what they're at. I have them middle of the pack, what, 12, I think? Yeah. So, I think Belichick's going to be fine as a coach for them. I just can't, I don't know what I'm rating because it's a completely new team.
I mean, it's a first year for Belichick, um, at North Carolina, and like you said, there's just a lot of roster turnover. Not only did a lot of guys leave, a lot of guys came in, and so it's just there's a lot of question marks around the roster itself. And when part of the biggest storyline that you've had this offseason is Bill Belichick's college girlfriend, it's you don't know what is really going on inside, the with the roster. It could be, because there's not a lot of coverage on the roster itself. It's just Bill Belichick and everything that's going on with him. So there's a lot of distractions off the football field, and there's a lot going on inside or on the field, just a lot of new guys and whatnot. So it's looking like it's going to be one of those weird, 7-6, 6-7, or 6-6 years that you see, 5-7 years that may end up being an anomaly in Bill Belichick's career at North Carolina, but it also could just end up being what it is for Bill Belichick. You don't know what's going to go on with this team.
All right, moving on to the Tar Heels in-state rivals, the NC State Wolfpack, another team that didn't build a lot through the portal. They mainly went out and got depth pieces, but there are a couple of guys they brought in uh, that could make an impact on offense. It's mainly on the offensive line. Jalen Grant and Teague Anderson both on that offensive line, brought in to protect their year two quarterback. CJ Bailey had an okay year last year. Um, for a freshman, it's those are pretty good numbers, especially the completion percentage in that mid 60s that I like. The 10 interceptions, that'll fade with experience and time. But overall, NC State, you know, an okay year last year. They went 6-7. I think they're due for a good bit of improvement this year. It's kind of why I have them like right at middle of the pack. I have them at 10. So I feel like they could maybe get up to 8 wins, but just top to bottom, I don't think the roster can stack up to a couple of the guys, especially on their schedule. They have some really hard games on the schedule.
Yeah, no, they were, yeah, below 500 team last year. Lost their bowl game, but they've got like I don't want to say a hard schedule because they're avoiding, a few of the top teams in the conference, but Virginia Tech, obviously, I think is another team that I'm just high on. Um, Georgia Tech is not easy. Notre Dame on the road is not going to be an easy game. Uh, Miami's not going to be easy. That's on the road. Florida State at home. Like, I know I was making fun of Florida State a few minutes ago, but I still rated them pretty high. I think they're going to be good this year. I don't know if they'll win that one. Just a lot of like toss up games this year that I don't necessarily see them winning, especially, with a very middle of the pack recruiting class this year. So, and that's kind of why I have them, I guess slightly above middle of the pack, I think, but there's just not, a lot that I can say about this team that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm excited about this and this for them.
All right, moving on is the Pittsburgh Panthers, another kind of middle of the pack, not terrible team, but not really good team. Have them at that 11 and 12 range. Um, but the difference with this team is I feel like there's a lot of good playmakers that'll get some national recognition. Desmond Reed, running back. Feel like he's set for a 1,300 yard season. Had 966 last year with a 5.3 average. Um, feel like he's due for a big jump in production this year. And then Eli Holstein had an okay year last year. But going into his sophomore year, I feel like he should be a lot better. The completion percentage I feel like could be slightly up, but 62, that's a good range. Just feel like they got to just lean more on him to be kind of more of a facilitator for this offense. They kind of had him as a game manager last year. So I feel like if they can kind of tap him to reach his full potential, I feel like this team could be decently, have a decent year. But I can't put them any higher than what they're at.
Yeah, I think, you know, the 11 12 range is a good spot to have them at just because their starters are still fairly young on the offensive side. They're Holstein and uh Kataris Hicks, who's transferring in, and Kenny Johnson and Raphael Williams Jr. That's their receiving core. It's not a I guess not a young one, but it's a little younger than some of the other teams in the conference. And then on the defensive side, they've got I think six juniors this year, five juniors, uh, yeah, something like that. Where this is going to be a big development year for them, and they if they can knock off a couple of teams like Notre Dame or Georgia Tech or Miami in those last three games of the season, those would be huge wins for them. I feel like I think also Louisville would be a huge win for them if they could get it. Just a couple of those games where maybe they're probably not favored to win, that they either play close or win would be huge for them. And then obviously that West Virginia game, I believe the backyard brawl, um, would be a huge one for them to win. That's a big rivalry over there. Um, so I think if they can get a couple of those games to go their way, I feel like it'd be a big confidence boost for Holstein. Going into his junior season, it'd be a big confidence boost for a lot of those defensive guys going into their last year, if they stay, obviously. But I don't know necessarily if they're going to be super good this year.
All right, moving on. The conference runner-ups last year in their first year in the ACC, the SMU Mustangs made it to the playoffs. Early exit in the first round to Penn State. Um, they do bring back a lot of guys this year, so I still think this will be a very good team. This year, Kevin Jennings back for another year as the starter. Jordan Hudson, that threat out wide. They brought in a lot of young playmakers and just out of high school, especially at receivers. They brought four here that I feel like could rotate in and out, have some impact. But there's some guys on defense for this Mustang team that I feel like are under the radar a little bit, and I feel like could really shine. Um, Ahmed Moses, the safety's one of them. I feel like if he could have the type of year I think he's gonna have, he could be a dark horse for the Jim Thorpe Award. Um, but yeah, I just see another good team or another good SMU team set for another good year to build off of last year. Once again, I have them at 4, but I feel like they could push for a conference title and again make an appearance in the playoffs.
Yeah. They had a pretty solid class this year, recruiting wise and transfer portal, top 40 overall. Um, and they bring back, like you said, a lot of those guys. They bring back Kevin Jennings again, um, the quarterback. So I feel like this is another opportunity for them to have a good year, but they do, on the road against Clemson, they play Miami, on the road against TCU. I mentioned last week in our Big 12 conference, predictions that TCU game is going to be a big game, and also that Baylor game. It's another Christian school
Yeah.
that's private and not really in the DFW area, but still in the range of SMU. So a couple of rivalry games early on for them that could result, in some losses. I think TCU is going to be a little bit better than some people say they will be this year. I think they'll be able to handle Syracuse and Stanford. I'm not very high on Stanford at all this year. Um, just I think that Wake Forest game could be a trap game. I feel like Wake Forest always has one game every year where they're like the greatest team of all time for no reason. But yeah, I think this is another one of those teams where it's like I think they'll end up very high. I had them ranked third in the conference. I think they'll still be very good. I think they'll still be in contention for a playoff this year. So I don't see, anything too different from last year, but I also I don't know that they'll be playing in the conference championship game.
All right, moving on. We have the Stanford Cardinal. Ryan just said not very high on Stanford. I'm also not. I have them at 16. Same as Ryan. It's just this team wasn't good last year. They were 3-9, second worst team in the conference, and they didn't get much better. I don't think over the offseason. They didn't get an outstanding amount of players from the portal. They brought in some guys on offense, especially through at receiver, but the best guy they got was C.J. Williams out of Wisconsin, who only had 248 yards last year. So I just think it's going to be another just not very good year for Stanford. I'm going to be quite frank.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not much to say about Stanford this year, which kind of sucks. They were one of the cooler teams in the mid 2010s when they were good. It was like you didn't like it that they were good because it was just like for some reason I don't know. I just for some reason never liked Stanford, but now that they kind of suck, it's like I miss it. Where's my top seven Stanford team um, that I can just count on to be pissed at for no reason. But they've also, got a pretty tough conference schedule this year. They've got SMU, they've got Miami, they've got North Carolina all on the road. And then they've got Notre Dame to finish out the year. Cal, I just don't think they'll beat. Pitt, I don't think they'll beat. Florida State, I don't think they'll beat. Just a lot of teams I don't think they'll beat this year. And again, it's sad to say, but they're just not going to be a good team this year.
All right, 4 teams left. Next one up is the Syracuse Orange. This is one of the teams I'm really excited to watch this year. They had a good season last year. We're fourth in the conference. They went 10-3 last year. I don't think too many people know that. They spoiled Miami's hopes at going to the playoffs by beating them on rivalry week. They led the country in passing last year with Kyle McCord. They're replacing him with Steve Angeli, which I think is another really good fit. I think Fran Brown is an amazing coach, and I just feel like there's another good year coming for the Orange. I don't really see them losing a step. I have them at 7. You have them at 10.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think their biggest game this year is going to be that Tennessee game. If they start the year off 0-1, I see them finishing 5-7. Just
Wow. Okay.
I that first game when it's against an opponent, even like Tennessee, who's not as good as they were last year, but it's still like, it's going to be a big game. It's on national television. Y- you know it's one of the bigger games in week one. Um, I think if they lose that game, they go 5-7. If they win that game, I could see them, playing a lot better, because they'll just have that confidence. Because with a first year quarterback, with Steve Angeli, uh, you know, in the first year in the program, uh, you've got a couple of receivers who have been there for a while. You've got a new transfer receiver. You've got an almost entirely new offensive line this year. Just a lot of new pieces on that offensive side that if they win that game, that's a big confidence boost. And then you go and play UConn and Colgate. I didn't even know Colgate had a football team, by the way. Um, a couple of games where it's like, all right, you can get that, extra confidence, really start building out the playbook a lot more. And then you go on the road against Clemson. And it's like, all right, you're feeling good. You're 3-0 at this point. Um, you know you can play spoiler to some of these teams. So I think if they lose that game, that's gonna hurt a lot because they have Clemson on the road, they have SMU on the road, they have Georgia Tech on the road, they have Miami on the road, and they have Notre Dame on the road. That's 5 road games. That's probably one of the hardest road schedules in the entire country this year.
Yeah,
Not to mention that
that's
Tennessee
rough.
game is also, I'm pretty sure, is that at Mercedes-Benz?
That's Mercedes. That's one of the kickoff games at Mercedes Benz.
Right. So that's not even a home game, and you're playing, an SEC school who's probably going to have a big crowd there. Um, so if they lose that game, I see their entire season just falling apart right there. Because that's
I
5 games that I don't know that they win already.
I can see where you're coming from, but I actually like their chances in that first game. I feel like it's a very new look Tennessee team, especially on the offense. And like I said, again, I think Fran Brown's one of the better coaches in the ACC. So I feel like he's gonna bring his guys in ready to play that week, and maybe stun some people and take Tennessee down the first week
Yeah, I never said, oh, I think they will lose. I'm just saying if they lose that game.
if they lose. Yeah, no, I see where that is too. All right, moving on. We got the Virginia Cavaliers. A team I'm not very high on. Neither are you. You have them 14. I have them 15. So bottom 14. There's a couple guys they went out and got. Chandler Morris at quarterback one is actually one I really like, but outside of that, I just don't see a lot of bright spots on their roster. Morris threw for 31 touchdowns last year at North Texas. So quarterback, I don't think that's going to be an issue for them. I just think it's going to be everything else that's going to be an issue for them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Another one of those teams where they've just got a lot of guys coming in, um, for their first year with the program, transferring in. Um, not necessarily like all those other teams where they've got an entire new squad, but enough to make you question, all right, how are they going to play together this year? And you know, they've actually got a fairly easy schedule this year. They avoid a lot of those top teams, but that's also, a lot of teams are circling Virginia as a win this year. I think Florida State's circling them as a win. Louisville, North Carolina, Cal, Duke, NC State. A lot of teams are just looking at Virginia this year and they're like, we can take them. We might have a little bit of trouble with them, but I think we can beat them.
All right, moving on to Virginia Tech. Um, this team last year wasn't terrible. They were 6-7, so they were below 500. But I feel like this team had a lot higher expectations at the beginning of the year. Um, But then at the beginning of the year last year, they went out and lost to Vandy opening week, and that kind of derailed their season. Kind of like how you're just saying you think could happen to Syracuse if they lose to Tennessee. That happened to Virginia Tech last year, I think. I think they're due for a rebound this year. They brought in a couple of good pieces from the portal. Terrion Stewart at running back is one I really like from Bowling Green. He had a really good start to the year last year, but towards the last 3 games, he kind of fell off a little bit, especially in that Arkansas State game. He had 6 carries for 8 yards. So I feel like if he's a little bit more consistent, they could have a really good running game. Um, Overall, I think this is a really good roster. And while I don't think they're exactly could push for a conference title, I think they could knock off a couple of big games on their schedule.
Yeah. I could see them taking a couple of those games. I think these first 2 games again could determine how their season goes. If they start off the year 0-2, they're not going to have a great year. Because I don't know that they'll necessarily. Maybe they could knock off Miami. That's a home game late in the year. That could be a trap game for Miami. I don't know that they'll knock off some of their other opponents on the road against Georgia Tech, on the road at NC State. That I feel like could be a tough game for them. Um, but if they can start the year off 1-1, 2-0 in that range, they could have a pretty successful year. Finish 8-4 probably, and get themselves into a pretty solid bowl game. But another team where it's just they have a couple of tougher opponents for themselves, uh, starting off the year.
All right, final team on our list. The Wake Forest Demon Deacons, final team, and their last on both our rankings. Didn't have a good year last year at 4-8, 35 new transfers, so it's another one of those teams with a big roster turnover through the portal. They brought in Robbie Ashford from South Carolina to be their quarterback. And at times he's been given a start. He's been a good runner of the football, but the passing game has been very inconsistent from him. I don't know. I just don't think it's going to be a very good team.
Yeah, no, we have them both ranked in the bottom. I'm just trying to figure out where their upset weekend is going to be. Um,
I'm saying it's October 25th
on-
against SMU.
Against SMU, I could see that one. I'm looking at their last couple of years when they've chosen their game. I feel like you know that Florida State game really set the tone for them in 22. They were 3-1 at that point, coming off a double overtime loss against Clemson. Uh, they finished that year 8-5 with a full win over Mizzou. In 23, they didn't really have a good season, but they beat Pitt for their
They
first
beat Pitt.
conference win of the season and their only conference win of the season. And then last year didn't really have their game that they beat a super opponent. But they beat NC State, who they probably shouldn't have beat. Um, I feel like this year, I feel like it's going to be North Carolina. I think
Okay.
first year head coach Belichick goes into that game. They're probably fighting for bowl contention this year, or in that game with a couple games left. They're probably at 4 or 5 wins at that point, and y- you know Wake Forest has 2 wins, uh, Kennesaw State and Western Carolina, and then North Carolina just comes out flat, and Wake Forest just dominates.
I don't know. Maybe we're all a bunch, or maybe me and you are both wildly incorrect, and Robbie Ashford will bring them back to the glory days of Sam Hartman, where they won 10 games in 2021. Highly doubt it, though.
Wake Forest to the playoffs.
Call it now. Write it down.
Write it on the notepad.
All right. Well, that is all 17 teams. That's a weird number.
That is such a weird
Uh,
number.
that's
just
all
add just
17
add one
teams.
more team. Just make it an even 18.
Yeah, that's all 17 teams in the ACC. Conference championship predictions. Ryan, what do you have?
Give me give me Clemson and Georgia Tech.
Well, last week we didn't have anything same about our conference championship predictions. We picked both teams completely different. Exact opposite this week because those are the exact two teams I had in my conference championship too. I think it's going to be a rematch between Clemson and Georgia Tech. I've actually got Georgia Tech taking the first meeting, but I think Clemson in this conference championship would win the second time.
I think Clemson takes both meetings.
That I could also see. All right. Well, that is going to do it for episode 4 of the Pre-Snap Pressure podcast. We've gone through all 4 Power 4 conferences, giving you our preseason rankings and explaining them. Next week, it'll be a week 0 preview. That'll be first college football weekend of the year. So we're both excited to to bring that to you next week. It's a big game week 0. Was it Iowa State, Kansas State in Ireland?
Yeah. That'll actually be a really big game that year. Or that week.
The Ireland game last year was pretty good, so hopefully this year's we'll share the similar fate. But anyways, that is going to do it from us. We will see you guys next week.